What's the deal with selecting tubes for microphonics? This question comes from Chad in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Hey Paul, as someone who builds tube microphones, I've always had to deal with selecting tubes that have low enough microphonics to ensure minor handling noise as well as the possibility of being in a room with a loud sound source. I'm curious if you go through any selection process for the tubes used in your BHK amplifier products. Considering they may end up sitting right in between two loud sound pressure sources, do you use tube damper rings or other techniques to physically restrain the tubes so that they exhibit no microphonics? Well, that's a really interesting question because there's a couple of really interesting answers to it. In my humble attempt at being more direct, so for those of you that want the quick answer and then want to go off on your business, finish your coffee, do whatever you're going to do. Yeah, tube microphonics are certainly an issue, and in many cases, tube dampers are recommended. It depends on the situation. If I'm going to use a tube damper, I prefer Herbie's. Herbie's makes some really good tube dampers, and I would highly recommend those if you think that gives you better sound. And so there you are. Go eat your bagel. For those of you sticking around, there's something a little bit more interesting going on here that I wanted to talk about. And first, let's talk about microphonics themselves. What are microphonics? Microphonics are the propensity for the character of a microphone added to something, right? So if there's something that acts like a microphone, we would say it's microphonic. So what would we think of that is, well, vacuum tubes are pretty easy because, you know, they have these glass bottles and all this mechanical stuff for the grid, for the plate, for the heaters, and they're mechanical. And if you vibrate them, it changes their alignment, and you could yell into some vacuum tubes, and if the gain's turned up, it acts like a microphone. You could literally hear your voice into that. Some you don't even need to yell into. So anything that's acting like a microphone is referred to as microphonic, and all sorts of things are microphonic. Capacitors, do we have any? I'm in the Director of Engineering's office here. Well, I don't have a capacitor to hold up as my prop, but yeah, definitely. Capacitors are microphonic. Even PC boards are microphonic to some extent. And so people go to all kinds of extremes in terms of vibration damping to lower microphonics. So that's kind of what we're talking about. But I said I had something else interesting. And this has been one of my sort of pet theories for a long time. And that is that when we look at the difference in sound between a vacuum tube and a solid state device, we know there are some very basic parameters that we don't have to guess at. So we know, for example, that a vacuum tube is a voltage amplification device where a bipolar transistor is a current amplifying device. We know that they are very, very different, and they sound very, very different. We know that FETs, field effect transistors, sound closer to vacuum tubes than do bipolar transistors, and MOSFETs, metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistors, pulled it out of the old gray cells, which is a different type. There's JFETs, junction FETs, and MOSFETs, and there's vertical FETs. There's all kinds of different FETs, as there are all kinds of different bipolars. And they all have a different sound to them. So putting that aside, the one thing that I think has been part of my pet theory for years is that the microphonics of a vacuum tube, and here's a quick digression, vacuum tubes are, let's pull a figure out of our rear ends, 100 times, 1,000 times more microphonic than a solid state device, if it's microphonic at all. And I'm sure somewhere down deep you rattle that wafer of silicon and it's going to change its parameters. But that's nothing we would even concern ourselves about. So let's just say that vacuum tubes are microphonics and solid state devices aren't. That's just a Paul extremism to make a point, okay? Given that, what if we thought about microphonics as not a bad thing, but a good thing? If you think about it, putting a piece of vacuum tube electronics, like our BHKs or whatever you have for vacuum tubes, inside of a listening room environment, like we do, our big speakers in Music Room 2 with the IRS-5s, I've got vacuum tube electronics with right in the field of sound for the amplifiers, and not too far away, the very more sensitive preamplifier is certainly in the same room and being vibrated by the speakers. And there's a delay between the time that the speakers make sound and that sound hits the microphonic element of the vacuum tube, and that forms a type of reverb. And reverb, remember, is a reverberant sound, means something that has gone away and is delayed in time and changed a little bit in its character before it comes back and we hear it a little bit later, right? So what's the simplest reverb you can think of? Years ago, we used to have these things called spring reverbs. My cousin had one in his car. And basically what it did, there was a transducer, like a little speaker, and it sent sound down a spring. And the spring, and there's a microphone at the other end. And the spring just delayed the time it took the sound to go down. And that, because of that delay, we had a reverberant effect, echo, if you will. You yell into a canyon and it comes back a little later, right? So vacuum tubes add a touch of reverb to the sound, and that, I think, we find very pleasing. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because it's a little bit of a crazy Paul theory, and I've never proven it out. It's just, it's one of those things. But every time I put tube dampers on my vacuum tubes, they get a little cleaner sounding and lose a little life, which is why I don't put tube dampers on my vacuum tubes. Just a personal thing. And my guess is I like that slight bit of distortion, that slight bit of reverberation that's occurring to those vacuum tubes. I think I like it. So there you go. All right. Great question, and thank you for letting me ramble on about it for a while. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.